My name is Carol, I'm 67 years old, and my own daughter kicked me out of the wedding I paid for with my retirement savings. Before I tell you how I turned her dream day into an absolute nightmare, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The air in the bridal suite at the Evergreen Manor was thick with the cloying scent of hairspray and expensive perfume. It was a beautiful room, all cream and gold, a room I'd paid for. Everything here I'd paid for. My husband of 45 years, David, stood stiffly beside me in his best suit, the one we'd bought for our anniversary. In my trembling hands I clutched a small velvet box. Inside was a pearl necklace, my inheritance from my mother, which she had inherited from hers. It was meant to be for Jessica, my daughter, on her wedding day. Piece of our history. A piece of my heart. Jessica stood before us, a stranger in a blindingly white $1,000 gown I didn't recognize. Her hair was swept up in a way that looked severe, and her makeup was a perfect cold mask. For a split second my heart swelled with a painful kind of pride. My little girl. But then I met her eyes and the feeling vanished, replaced by a chilling dread. There was no warmth in them. No joy. Just a flat, dismissive emptiness. "Mom. Dad," she said, her voice as crisp and businesslike as a bank teller's. "What are you doing back here?" David cleared his throat, confused. "Honey, the coordinator brought us. We just wanted to see you. To give you this before everything starts." He gestured toward the box in my hands. I held it out, forcing a smile that felt like cracking glass. "It's Grandma's necklace," I thought. She didn't even look at it. She took a step forward, pulling the heavy door almost shut behind her, leaving her bridesmaids as blurry figures in the background. She lowered her voice, but it only made the words sharper, crueler. "Look," she said with an impatient sigh. "There's been a change of plans." My breath caught in my throat. A change of plans? I'd spent months on these plans. I drained my savings for these plans. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" And that's when she dropped the bomb. The words that would echo in my mind for the rest of my life. "Mom, Dad, you're not invited to the ceremony or the reception." The world tilted. The perfumed air felt thin, unbreathable. I must have heard wrong. This was a joke. A horrible, tasteless joke. But her face remained a blank slate. "This is my day," she continued, her voice unwavering. "And honestly, your presence would make Brandon's family uncomfortable. It's a different circle. They have certain expectations." Uncomfortable. A different circle. The words were like tiny poison darts. Us, the people who raised her, who paid for every single silk flower and crystal glass in this overpriced venue, would make her new wealthy in-laws uncomfortable. David found his voice first, a hoarse whisper. "Jessica, we're your parents. We paid for everything. Your father took $50,000 out of his retirement fund for this." She shrugged. A tiny, insignificant movement of her shoulders that shattered my world. "And I appreciate that," she said, with no appreciation in her voice at all. "But this day isn't about you. It's about me and Brandon. It's just better this way." Through the crack in the door I saw Brandon's mother, a woman dripping in diamonds, glance our way. Her expression wasn't one of surprise. It was irritation, as if we were vendors causing a scene. She knew exactly what was happening. She turned away, a smug little smile playing on her lips. They had all planned this. The wedding coordinator, a young woman with a plastic smile, appeared at Jessica's side. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I can show you out through a side entrance, so we don't disturb the arriving guests." Disturb the guests. We were now a disturbance. My daughter, my only child, didn't even say goodbye. She just turned her back on us, the door clicking softly shut, sealing us out of the life we had given her. We stood there in the hallway, two ghosts at a feast we had provided. The sound of a string quartet warming up drifted from the garden, a beautiful mocking melody. We walked out, heads held high, past the floral arch we'd chosen, past the white chairs we'd rented, past the smiling faces of strangers who had no idea the parents of the bride had just been thrown out like trash. We got into our car, the engine silent. David gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. I stared down at the velvet box in my lap, the pearls inside feeling like stones. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. A different feeling was rising inside me, hot and sharp. It was a cold, hard clarity. She had called us a disturbance. She had made her choice. And now I was about to make mine. I turned to my husband, my voice low and steady, a tone he hadn't heard in 45 years of marriage. "David," I said, the words feeling powerful on my tongue. "Don't go home." He looked at me, his face a mask of confusion and pain. "The diner? Carol, what's on your mind?" "A new plan," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "She made her plan. Now we make ours." He didn't question me again. He just put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, away from the $50,000 monument to our own foolishness. The silence in the car was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered all the words we couldn't say. My mind spooled backward, a frantic search for the exact moment the train had left the tracks, the moment my sweet daughter had been replaced by this cold, calculating stranger. It had all started so differently, with a phone call 6 months ago that was filled with so much joy it felt like sunshine pouring through the receiver. "I'm engaged," Jessica had shrieked, and David and I had hugged right there in the kitchen, laughing. Our baby was getting married. Brandon, she gushed, was perfect. An investment banker from a good family, an old Chicago family she'd emphasized with money and connections. He made her happy. And for us, that was all that mattered. "We want to help," David had said immediately, his voice thick with emotion. "Whatever you need for the wedding, sweetheart, we're here." "Oh, Dad, that's so sweet, but this is going to be a lot," she'd said, a coy, practiced hesitation in her voice that I should have recognized. "Brandon's family, they have certain standards. The wedding needs to reflect that." That should have been the first red flag, that mention of standards that somehow didn't include us. But we were blinded by love, by the desperate desire to give our only child the world. We talked it over late into the night. Our retirement was comfortable. We weren't rich, certainly not like Brandon's family was supposed to be, but we were secure. "It's her only wedding, Carol," David had said, his eyes pleading with me to agree. "Let's give her the dream." So he went to our financial advisor, a man we trusted for 20 years, and he authorized the withdrawal. $50,000. It felt like a piece of our future, but we handed it over gladly, thinking it was the last big gift we'd ever give her. At first, it was everything I dreamed of. Jessica and I spent a blissful weekend looking at venues, sipping champagne, laughing as we imagined the day. She was my little girl again, holding my hand, asking for my opinion. Then Brandon started coming along. He was charming, I'll admit. He had a way of smiling that made you want to agree with him. The lovely, intimate venue we'd both adored was suddenly not prestigious enough. He'd said it with a disarming laugh. "Jessica deserves a venue that makes a statement, don't you think, Carol?" The guest list was the next to go. Our close friends, our cousins who had watched Jessica grow up, were quietly erased. In their place were names I didn't recognize. Brandon's business associates, friends of the Thompson family. Then came the dress. The simple, elegant A-line gown that had made Jessica cry with joy in the boutique was returned. Brandon's mother thought it was a little plain, Jessica had explained, refusing to meet my eyes. The new one was a monstrosity of lace and beads that cost twice as much and looked half as elegant. Every time I tried to voice a concern, my daughter's voice would get that tight, annoyed edge. "Mom, please don't stress me out. Brandon knows best. He understands these things." I was being demoted, from mother of the bride to a silent, open checkbook. My opinion wasn't wanted, only my money. The final chilling memory surfaced now, as we drove past manicured lawns and big empty houses. It was about a month ago. I'd come by her apartment to drop off some mail. The door was ajar, and I heard her on the phone in the other room talking to Brandon. She was laughing, a light, tinkling sound that now felt grotesque, like bells at a funeral. "Of course they'll pay for the new centerpieces. They're hideous, but the florist says they're what everyone is doing," she chirped. "Don't worry, honey. It's fine. They're simple people. They'll pay for anything if I cry a little. It's their whole identity, just wanting me to be happy. Simple people." That's what we were to her. Our life's work, our sacrifices, our unconditional love. All of it was reduced to a simple, easily manipulated cliché. I should have walked in there and confronted her. I should have taken back my checkbook and my dignity. But I didn't. I told myself she was just stressed. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding, and I went home. But what I didn't know, sitting there in the car with my heart shattered into a million pieces, was that her cruelty and his deception were far more calculated, and far more desperate, than I could have ever imagined. The moment we stepped into the diner on Maple Street, it felt like stepping into another reality. Outside, the sun was shining on a world of $50,000 weddings and cruel betrayals. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old coffee and frying bacon. The vinyl on the booths was cracked, and the waitress called David Hahn. It was real. It was our world. We slid into a booth in the back corner. David ordered 2 black coffees, his hands shaking slightly as he pushed the laminated menu aside. He looked at me, his eyes full of a pain that mirrored my own. "Carol, what are we doing?" he whispered. This is our little girl." I reached across the table and put my hand over his. His skin was cold. I thought of his 45 years of getting up before dawn to go to a job he didn't always love, just to build the retirement fund he had so easily raided for her. I thought of our daughter's casual, dismissive shrug. "She stopped being our little girl the moment she decided our love was a transaction," I said, and my voice was harder than I'd ever heard it. "She made a business decision, David. Now we're making one too." I pulled the thin manila folder from my bag. It felt heavy with the weight of our misplaced trust. I opened it and laid the contracts out on the sticky table, a paper trail of our own stupidity. I found the master agreement for the Evergreen Manor. I found the manager's direct line. I took a deep breath and I dialed. A harried, stressed voice answered on the second ring. "Evergreen Manor, this is Mark." "Mark," I said, my voice eerily calm. "My name is Carol Miller. My husband, David, and I are the signatories on contract number 752 for the Miller-Thompson wedding, scheduled to begin right about now." "Oh, Mrs. Miller. Thank God. Is everything all right?" "The bride seems. We've heard there's some kind of family issue." "You could call it that," I said dryly. "Mark, I am currently sitting in a diner 5 miles from your venue. My husband and I have just been informed by the bride, our daughter, that we are not invited to attend the event we have fully funded." There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of music, the string quartet we had paid for. I'm sorry, what? That can't be right." "Oh, it's right. Which brings me to the reason for my call. As per Section 4B of our contract, the final payment installment of $20,000 was due upon our arrival and satisfaction. As we have been ejected from the premises, we are clearly not satisfied. You are to consider the contract breached by the client party. I am formally withdrawing our payment authorization, effective immediately." Wait, Mrs. Miller, you can't do that," he sputtered, his voice rising in panic. "The guests are seated. The groom is at the altar. We have 150 plates of salmon ready to go." "That sounds like a problem for the bride and groom," I said, the words tasting like ice injustice. "They wanted the wedding. They can figure out how to pay for it." I hung up the phone before he could argue further. I slid the phone across the table to David. He looked at it, then at me. A flicker of something I hadn't seen in years crossed his face. A flash of the determined young man I had married. He picked up the next contract. "The florist." He made the call. His voice was a low growl. "Yes, this is David Miller." "That's correct, the father of the bride. The one who signed your check. I need you to go to the venue and retrieve every single petal you've delivered. Your services are no longer required." My turn. The caterer. Then David called the 7-piece band. Call after call, we sat in that sticky vinyl booth and quietly, methodically, took a sledgehammer to our daughter's perfect gilded day. With each call I felt a layer of hurt peel away, replaced by a cold, hard sense of control. We finished the last call to the photographer, just as our cold coffees arrived. We sat in silence, the phone lying on the table between us like a dormant weapon. It felt like holding our breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. It didn't take long. The first missed call appeared on my screen less than 20 minutes later. The caller ID read, "Jessica." I ignored it. Then another from the wedding planner, her name flashing with frantic urgency. And another from an unknown number. And then Jessica again and again. My phone started vibrating without pause, a frantic, buzzing panic against the tabletop. The storm we had just unleashed was about to hit them full force. We drove home in a state of suspended animation. The incessant buzzing of my phone was the only sound in the car, a grim soundtrack to the demolition we had just carried out. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I had 17 missed calls and a string of frantic, incoherent texts. "Mom, what did you do? Answer your phone. The caterer is packing up the food." I felt a grim, chilling satisfaction. This was the consequence. This was what happened when you treated people's love and sacrifice like an inconvenience. I thought that was the worst of it. The private meltdown, the ruined party, the humiliation she had brought upon herself. I was so naive. The real attack hadn't even begun. The next morning the calls had stopped. An eerie, unsettling silence had fallen. I was standing in the kitchen, staring into a coffee cup, when my phone pinged. It was a text from my younger sister, Susan. No words, just a link to Facebook. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. Clicked it. Took me to a video. A live video posted late last night from Brandon's account, already with thousands of views. The thumbnail was a professionally pathetic picture of Jessica, her face blotchy with tears, leaning her head on Brandon's shoulder. The title was crafted for maximum damage. Our wedding day nightmare. The truth about my toxic parents. My blood ran cold. My hands shook as I pressed play. They were in a plush hotel room, the lighting artfully dim. Jessica was wrapped in a white hotel robe, trying to look fragile and victimized. Brandon held the camera, his face a perfect mask of sorrowful indignation. We hardly know what to say," Brandon began, his voice thick with an emotion he was clearly faking. "Last night was supposed to be the happiest night of our lives. But instead it was destroyed. It was willfully, maliciously destroyed by my new wife's parents, Carol and David Miller." He said our full names. He wanted everyone to know exactly who to hate. He panned the camera to Jessica, who let out a gut-wrenching sob, a sound she must have practiced. "They were so controlling," she whimpered, dabbing at a tearless eye. "The entire time. Every detail, they had to have it their way. They wanted the wedding to be about them, their friends, their choices. When they realized it was my day, Brandon's day, they had a complete narcissistic breakdown." Narcissistic breakdown. The clinical cutting term was a dagger. It was designed to sound official, damning, like a diagnosis. "They couldn't handle not being the center of attention," Brandon continued, shaking his head sadly as if he pitied us. "So they retaliated. Out of pure childish spite, they called every single vendor and shut it all down. They left us and our 150 guests, our friends and family, stranded and humiliated. They sabotaged their own daughter's wedding." I watched, my hand clamped over my mouth in sheer horror. They had taken the truth and twisted it into an unrecognizable monster. In their story, we were the abusers. We were the villains. Jessica looked directly into the camera, her eyes wide and pleading. "All we ever wanted was to celebrate our love," she cried. "But they just couldn't stand to see me happy. I guess I should have known. They've always been this way." I scrolled down, my stomach churning. The comments were a tidal wave of poison. Hundreds of them. "What horrible toxic parents. I can't believe it. You're better off without those monsters in your life. Stay strong. I've met them, they always seem so normal. Goes to show you never know." People who had known me for years, women from my book club, distant cousins, were all liking the post, sending heart emojis to Jessica, condemning us without a single phone call to hear our side. My phone rang. It was Susan. "Carol, what on earth is going on?" she demanded, her voice a mix of confusion and accusation. "People are calling me, asking what you did. Is it true? Did you really ruin your own daughter's wedding?" I couldn't form words. I was choking on the sheer, breathtaking injustice of it all. They hadn't just uninvited us from a party. They were trying to uninvite us from our own lives. They were systematically destroying our reputation, burning every bridge, salting the earth. They were trying to erase us, to rewrite our entire history with them as the heroes and us as the villains. But in their desperation, in their rush to control the narrative, they made one crucial, fatal mistake. They underestimated me. They thought I was just a simple, sad old woman who would crumble under the shame. They had no idea I was about to start fighting back. The public humiliation was a new kind of pain. It was sharp and hot, and it burned away any lingering grief, leaving behind a cold, diamond-hard rage. I was no longer just a hurt mother. I was a woman slandered, and I would be damned if I let them get away with it. For 2 days I didn't answer the phone. I let the angry voicemails and confused texts pile up. Instead, I sat at my computer, a cup of bitter coffee at my side, and I became a detective. First, I focused on Brandon Thompson, this perfect, wealthy investment banker. My gut screamed that he was a fraud. I started with the basics, searching his name, his company. Everything online looked pristine. A polished LinkedIn profile, photos from charity events. But it was too perfect, too curated. I needed to get behind the curtain. I called the one person I knew who might be able to help, an old friend from college, Mark. David and I had known him for 40 years. Mark had spent his entire career navigating the cutthroat world of Chicago's financial sector. He knew people. More importantly, he knew gossip. "Mark, it's Carol Miller," I said when he answered. "I need a favor. It's a strange one, and it's completely off the record." I told him the name. Brandon Thompson, supposedly of Sterling Investments. I didn't give him the sordid details of the wedding, just said that my daughter had married him and that something felt terribly wrong. Mark was a good friend. He heard the urgency in my voice. "Let me make some calls," he said. "Don't you worry, Carol. If there's dirt, I'll find it." While I waited for Mark, I turned my attention to his supposedly wealthy family. I searched for them online. They had a beautiful home in a posh suburb, Westlake. Pictures from galas and country club events littered the internet. It all looked perfect. Too perfect. I remembered the name of the county from a piece of mail I'd once seen on Jessica's coffee table. I went to the county's public records website. It was a clunky, outdated system, but I was determined. It took hours of searching, cross-referencing, but I finally found it. Property records. I typed in the address for the Thompson family home. My breath hitched. The house had been refinanced 3 times in the last 5 years, each time pulling out more equity. People with old money don't live on the edge like that. And then I saw it, a digital document that made my heart hammer against my ribs. A notice of default from 8 months ago. A pre-foreclosure warning. They were on the brink of losing their precious mansion. They had resolved it somehow, probably by taking on another high-interest loan. But the evidence was undeniable. They were drowning in debt. The next afternoon, Mark called back. He didn't even say hello. His voice was grim. "Carol, are you sitting down? Just tell me, Mark. It's worse than you think. This kid, Brandon. He's not just a bad apple. He's rotten to the core. He was fired from Sterling Investments 4 months ago. It was kept very quiet, but the word on the street is that he was caught improperly handling client funds. That's the polite way of saying he was embezzling. He avoided charges by paying some of it back, probably with his parents' last dime." My hand flew to my mouth. A criminal. My daughter had married a criminal. "The family's a house of cards," Mark continued, his voice filled with pity. "The father made some catastrophic investments years ago and lost everything. They've been living on credit and fumes ever since, desperately trying to keep up appearances. They're broke, Carol. They're frauds. The whole family." I hung up the phone, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. It was all a lie. A massive, calculated fraud. The expensive wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was a stage. It was a last-ditch effort to project an image of wealth they didn't have, to lure in new, unsuspecting investors for whatever scheme Brandon was cooking up next. They needed our retirement money to fund the charade, but they couldn't have the simple people who actually paid for it ruining the illusion with their simple middle-class ways. A cold dread washed over me as the central, terrible question took shape in my mind. Was my daughter, my Jessica, the biggest fool in Illinois, completely duped by this family of grifters? Or was she, somehow, in on it from the very beginning? For a week, our house was a fortress of silence. We were prisoners in our own home. The digital venom of Jessica's video poisoning our well of friendships. The angry calls from confused relatives died down, replaced by a wounded, waiting silence. Jessica didn't call. The video stayed up, a monument to their lies, gathering more and more sympathetic comments for the brave young couple. David and I lived in a strange limbo, armed with the ugly truth but unsure of what to do with it. Did we post our own video waving bank statements and foreclosure notices? Felt dirty, like sinking to their level. I felt like I was holding a live grenade and I was terrified of the fallout no matter which way I threw it. Then on a Tuesday afternoon the doorbell rang. A sharp, insistent sound that shattered the quiet. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart hammered as I walked to the door, peering through the peephole. My breath caught. It was Jessica. But it was a version of her I had never seen before. The polished, confident bride from the wedding, the tearful, manipulated victim from the video. Both were gone. This Jessica was a wreck. Her expensive-looking blonde hair was greasy and uncombed, her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen shut, and she was wearing the same stained designer sweatshirt she'd had on in the video. It hung on her thin frame, a sad relic of a life that was already over. She looked like she hadn't slept or eaten in a week. "Mom!" she croaked when I opened the door, and her voice broke a raw, ragged sound of pure despair. Despite everything, despite the rage and the betrayal, the raw pain in that single word twisted my gut. The mother in me, the one I thought had been burned away, stirred with a painful lurch. I stepped aside. "Come in, Jessica." She stumbled into the living room like a sleepwalker and collapsed onto the sofa. She didn't sink into the cushions. She perched on the edge, a bundle of raw nerves. She just sat there, staring at the blank television screen for a full minute. The silence was deafening. Finally she spoke, her voice a dead, hollow monotone. "He's gone." "Who's gone?" I asked softly, though I already knew the answer. "Brandon," she whispered. "He left yesterday. Just gone. Packed his designer bags, took his leased sports car. He emptied our joint bank account. All the wedding gift money from his family's friends, everything. It's all gone." She looked up at me, her eyes wild with a mixture of panic and sheer disbelief. "He's been lying to me, Mom. He lied about everything. His job, his family's money, it was all a lie. The bank called yesterday. The lease on our apartment, they're going to evict us. The payments haven't been made in 3 months. He was paying for everything on credit cards that are now maxed out." When I confronted him, he just laughed at me. She let out a bitter, humorless sound that was more of a sob. He told me I was the biggest fool he'd ever met. That I was so desperate to believe the fantasy that I never asked the right questions. Her voice started to rise, gaining a hysterical edge. "And then he told me he'd called you last week asking for money. For $20,000 to tide him over." Her eyes, wild and accusatory, finally focused on me. "He told me you refused to help us. Your own daughter. He said if you had just given him the money, if you weren't so selfish, he would have stayed. This is your fault." The accusation hung in the air, so breathtakingly absurd, so twisted. It sucked all the oxygen from the room. After everything, after she had publicly disowned us, humiliated us, and participated in a massive fraud, here she was, standing in the ruins of the life she had chosen, and she was still finding a way to blame me. It was in that moment that all the lingering pity, all the maternal instinct finally died. It was replaced by a cold, hard certainty. She stood in my living room, the architect of her own destruction, and she was still pointing the finger. I knew then that this wasn't just about money or a disastrous wedding anymore. This was about breaking a 30-year cycle of entitlement and blame. This was about finally, once and for all, forcing her to look in the mirror. I let her accusation hang in the heavy silence of the room. I didn't rush to defend myself. I didn't yell back. I just looked at her, my gaze steady, and let her see the utter bone-deep exhaustion in my eyes. The old Carol would have been a flurry of apologies and excuses. The old Carol would have been trying to comfort her, to soothe the hurt she herself had caused. But the old Carol was gone, burned away in the fire of the last 2 weeks. "My fault, Jessica?" I said, my voice quiet but sharp, each word a carefully placed stone. "Let's be very clear about what is and is not my fault. Did I lie to you for over a year about who I was and where my money came from?" She flinched, opening her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. I wasn't finished. "Did I get fired from my job for being a thief? Did I convince you to turn your back on the only 2 people in the world who have ever truly loved you, just to maintain a lifestyle I couldn't afford?" Her face crumpled, the anger beginning to dissolve into confusion. "Did I coach you on what to say in a vicious public video designed to destroy the reputations of your own parents?" I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the printouts from my research. The foreclosure notices. The printout of Mark's email detailing Brandon's embezzlement. I didn't slam them down. I placed them gently in front of her, one by one. This is the good family you were so desperate to impress, Jessica. A family of con artists. This is the man you chose over your own parents. A man who was using you just as much as he was using us. She stared at the papers, her jaw slack. She picked up the foreclosure notice, her eyes scanning the official legal language. The color drained from her face. I didn't know it was this bad, she stammered. Didn't you? I pressed, my voice still quiet but relentless. Or did you just not want to know? Did you enjoy the fantasy so much that you decided not to look too closely at the cracks in the foundation? He told me he lost his job, she whispered, her voice barely audible now. He said it was a temporary layoff, a corporate restructuring. He said he had other prospects, that everything would be fine once we were married and had access to new people. To my retirement fund, you mean? I finished for her, my voice like ice. The money your father worked his entire life for. The money you dismissed as coming from simple people. That hit her. I saw it land. Her head snapped up, tears finally welling in her eyes. I never should have said that. No, you shouldn't have, I agreed. Now tell me about the video. The one where you called your father and me narcissistic abusers. Was that also his idea? She flinched and finally broke. The ugly, racking sobs of someone who has no one left to blame but herself filled the room. Yes, she choked out between gasps. He said it was the only way. He said you were predictable. That if we made you look bad enough, you'd pay anything just to make the public shame stop. He said you'd always cave in the end. Because you always have. Because you always have. The words hung in the air. A devastatingly accurate indictment of my own parenting. He was right. We had always caved. We had enabled this behavior. Every time we paid a credit card bill she couldn't handle. Every time we overlooked her casual disrespect. Every time we made excuses for her selfishness. We were teaching her that actions didn't have real, lasting consequences. We had helped build the entitled, broken woman who was now crying on our sofa. The reckoning wasn't just for her. It was for me too. The lies were all out in the open now, raw and suffocating. She looked up at me, her face a mess of tears and shame, her eyes finally clear of the delusion she had wrapped herself in for years. She whispered the question that was her last, desperate hope. A question that was fragile and terrifying. What do I do now? David came in from the garage then, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He must have heard the sobbing. He took in the scene in a single sweeping glance. Jessica crumpled on the couch, the damning documents spread on the table, my face set like stone. He didn't ask what happened. He looked at me, and in his weary eyes I saw that he already knew. He understood that this was the moment of truth. That night, after a distraught Jessica had cried herself to sleep in the guest room, David and I sat at the kitchen table. It was long past midnight. The house was silent, but my mind was screaming. The easy path was to let her stay, to clean up her mess, to write a few checks and make the creditors go away, to pretend this was all Brandon's fault and that our daughter was just an innocent victim. It would have been so much simpler. But it would have been a lie. We can't just fix this for her, David, I said into the darkness. If we do, we'll be having this same conversation in 5 years, just with a different man and a different disaster. He nodded, his hand covering mine on the cool wood of the table. I know, he said, his voice heavy. The old way is over. She needs to learn. The hard way. The next morning we sat her down at that same kitchen table. She looked small and fragile like a child. But she wasn't a child and we couldn't treat her like one anymore. I had a single sheet of paper and a pen. We've talked. I began, my voice formal. We're not going to let you end up on the street. But our help is no longer unconditional. From now on, things are going to be different. This isn't a gift. This is a contract. These are our terms, and they are not negotiable. I pushed the paper across the table. David had helped me write it. It was clear, direct, and left no room for misinterpretation. 1, I said, my finger tapping the first line. You can stay here in the guest room for a maximum of 90 days. On the 91st day, you will be out on your own, whether you are ready or not. 2, you will find a job. Any job. I don't care if it's flipping burgers or cleaning hotel rooms. You have 30 days to start earning a paycheck. You will contribute $200 a month for room and board while you are here. 3. You will attend financial counseling to learn how to manage a budget, and you will see a therapist to understand why you make the destructive choices you do. We will pay for the first session of each. The rest will come out of your paycheck. 4. David chimed in, his voice firm and unwavering. The debts. We have an appointment for you with our lawyer tomorrow. He will advise you on your options, including bankruptcy. We will not be paying off your credit cards or dealing with your creditors. You will face them yourself. You will be responsible for the mess you helped create. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers, for the final, most important term. And 5. You will go back on Facebook. You will write a public post. You will tell the unvarnished truth about what you and Brandon did. And you will publicly apologize to your father and me for the vicious lies you told. You will correct the record that you so deliberately and maliciously destroyed. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with panic and disbelief. I can't do that, she gasped. People will, they'll destroy me. I'll never be able to show my face again. You should have thought of that before you tried to destroy us, I said, my voice like ice. Reputations are earned, Jessica. So is trust. You don't get to hide from this. You have to own it. All of it. Those are the terms. You either accept all of them right now, or you can walk out that door and we will wish you the best of luck. She stared at the list, her face pale. This wasn't the easy bailout she had expected. The tearful reunion where all was forgiven and we wrote a check to make the bad things go away. This was hard. This was work. This was public humiliation and deep personal accountability. The choice was hers to make. For 2 full days, Jessica stayed in the guest room, the door closed. A tense, suffocating silence filled the house. I could hear the muffled sounds of her on the phone, her voice oscillating between pleading and anger. I knew she was calling her so-called friends, the ones from Brandon's world, looking for another, easier way out, a softer place to land. But it seemed the friends from her glamorous life had vanished along with the money. No one wanted to be associated with a broke, disgraced social climber. She was utterly alone. On the 3rd day, she emerged from the room. She looked like she had aged 10 years. Her eyes were hollow, but her expression was one of grim, exhausted acceptance. Okay, she said quietly, her voice hoarse. I'll do it. All of it. And so began the longest, hardest 90 days of our lives. Having her in the house was a constant exercise in restraint for me. Every maternal instinct I possessed screamed at me to help, to coddle, to soften the blows. The first time she sat at the dining room table, trying to write a resume and crying in frustration because she had no real work history to speak of, I had to physically grip the kitchen counter to stop myself from rushing over and doing it for her. I had to remind myself over and over. This is not helping, this is harming. When she came home dejected from another failed job interview, her shoulders slumped in defeat, I had to bite my tongue instead of saying, "Don't worry, honey, we'll take care of you." Instead, I just said, "Well, what are you going to try tomorrow?" It felt cruel, but I knew it was necessary. Watching her struggle was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. It's easy to write a check, easy to make a problem disappear. It's much harder to step back and let someone you love feel the full, painful weight of their own choices, knowing it's the only way they'll ever learn to stand on their own 2 feet. She finally found a job. It wasn't in marketing. It wasn't glamorous. It was as a barista at a Starbucks across town, the early morning shift. She had to be there at 4:30 a.m. She, who had never willingly woken up before 9. The first week, she came home every day and collapsed into bed, her face a mask of exhaustion and quiet humiliation as she complained about rude customers and the smell of burnt coffee that clung to her clothes. But she went. Every single day. The public apology was the worst part for her. I sat with her as she typed it out, her hands shaking so badly she kept misspelling words. It wasn't eloquent. It was short, simple, and brutal. It admitted her complicity in the lies, it briefly explained Brandon's fraud, and it ended with a direct, unqualified apology to David and me. She read it to me, her voice trembling. "Is it okay?" she asked. I just nodded. She took a deep breath and hit post. Then she immediately deactivated her Facebook account, unable to face the inevitable fallout. But the first step toward repairing the damage had been taken. One evening, about a month into her stay, she came to me, holding a bill from a collection agency. Her face was pale. "I can't pay this," she whispered. "My whole paycheck this week will barely cover my food and my contribution to you." The old me would have snatched the bill from her hand and written a check. The new me looked at her and said calmly, "Then you need to call them. You need to explain your situation and try to work out a payment plan." She looked horrified. "They'll yell at me." I just looked at her. "Probably," I said. "You should call them anyway." She stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked back to her room, the bill clutched in her hand. Later I heard her on the phone, her voice shaking but firm, negotiating. For the first time in her life, my daughter was truly on her own, navigating a world without a safety net woven from our bank account. And slowly, painfully, something began to change in her. But I watched her, my heart a tangle of hope and fear. Was this change real? Or was it just another performance, the longest, most difficult one she'd ever had to put on? The 90 days passed in a blur of early morning alarms, the scent of stale coffee, and quiet, awkward dinners. True to our word, on the first of the 4th month, we told her it was time to find her own place. I saw a flicker of the old panic in her eyes, a child's fear of being cast out. But it was quickly replaced by a weary resolve. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just nodded. She spent every evening after her grueling shifts at Starbucks scouring apartment listings online. She wasn't looking at the trendy downtown loft she and Brandon had favored. She was looking at tiny studios in neighborhoods she used to turn her nose up at. She found one, a small 3rd-floor walk-up with a kitchen the size of a closet. The rent was low enough that she could just barely afford it on her barista salary, with nothing left over. We helped her move. The whole process took less than 2 hours. It was a stark contrast to the last time we'd helped her set up a home, a process that had involved multiple trips to high-end furniture stores and arguments over designer paint colors. This time, her worldly belongings consisted of 2 suitcases of clothes, a second-hand mattress she'd found on Craigslist, and a box of plates and mugs from our kitchen. As we stood in the empty, echoing room, with its scuffed floors and a faint smell of cabbage, she looked around. I braced myself for a complaint, a lament about how far she had fallen. Instead, she ran a hand along the dusty windowsill and a small, genuine smile touched her lips. "It's not much," she said, more to herself than to us. "But it's mine. I can pay for this. All by myself." I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen since she was a little girl who had just learned to ride her bike without training wheels. Pure, unadulterated pride. Life settled into a new, tentative rhythm. The biggest test came with Thanksgiving. It was the first major holiday since the wedding disaster. We invited her over, expecting a quiet, perhaps strained, dinner. But the day before she called. "Mom," she said, her voice nervous and hesitant. "I know this is crazy. But I was wondering, could I actually host this year? My place. I know it's tiny, but I want to try." I was floored. Jessica had never cooked a holiday meal in her life. She'd once tried to make toast and set off the smoke alarm. "Are you sure, honey? That's a lot of work, and your kitchen is so small." "I want to do it," she insisted, a new determination in her voice. "Please. I've been watching YouTube videos. Just bring yourselves." So on Thanksgiving Day, David and I drove to her little apartment, a bottle of wine in hand. The space was clean, and she tried to make it festive with a few gourds on her tiny table. The air smelled of roasting turkey. The meal she served wasn't perfect. The turkey was a little dry on one side, the gravy had a few lumps, and the pumpkin pie had a giant crack down the middle. But she had made it all. From scratch. Herself. As we were finishing our coffee, she disappeared into her bedroom and came back with a card and a small, rumpled envelope. "This is for you," she said, sliding it across the table. I opened the card. Inside, in her familiar looping handwriting, it said, "Mom and Dad, there are no words to say how sorry I am for the pain I caused. Thank you for not saving me so I could finally learn how to save myself. I love you." My vision blurred with tears. I looked at the envelope. My name was written on it. I opened it. Inside was a personal check for $50. In the memo line she had written, "Payment for of $1,000. "It's not much," she said, her cheeks flushing a deep red. "It's all I could spare after paying my rent." It's going to take me a lifetime, but I'm going to pay you back. Every single cent of Dad's retirement money. Tears were streaming down my face now. I looked across the table at my daughter, this woman who was working a minimum wage job and living in a tiny studio, offering to pay back a debt she knew was impossible. It wasn't about the money. It had never really been about the money. It was about this moment of genuine remorse, of accountability, of profound hard-won effort. Maybe, just maybe, I was finally getting my daughter back. The $50 check became a monthly ritual, a small, tangible symbol of her commitment. Every first of the month, an envelope would arrive in our mailbox. I never cashed them. Instead, I opened a new savings account in her name and secretly deposited every single one, a growing testament to her effort. Christmas approached, and with it a new kind of peace. Jessica came over on Christmas Eve. She looked different, healthier. The frantic, haunted look was gone from her eyes, replaced by a quiet confidence. She'd gotten a promotion at Starbucks to shift supervisor. It came with a tiny raise in health insurance, and she spoke about it with the same pride as if she'd been made CEO. She was also taking a night class in digital marketing at the local community college. She was rebuilding brick by painful brick. She didn't bring lavish gifts, just a loaf of homemade banana bread that was slightly burnt on the bottom, and a bottle of inexpensive wine. We sat by the fire, the way we used to when she was a little girl, the lights of the Christmas tree twinkling. There were no expectations, no simmering tensions. We just talked. She told us about her regulars at the coffee shop, about a difficult customer she'd had to handle with a newfound patience. She pulled out a small notebook and proudly showed us her budget for the next month, with every dollar accounted for. At one point she fell silent, staring into the flames, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know," she said softly, "it's so strange. For years all I wanted was to be rich. I was so ashamed of us." I stiffened, the old wound aching. "Ashamed of what, Jessica?" "Of being normal," she said, looking up at me, her eyes clear and startlingly honest. "Of our normal middle-class life in our normal middle-class house." I looked at Brandon and his family at their country club and their European vacations, and I thought that was what mattered. I thought that was what made a person valuable. I was so desperate to be a part of their world that I was willing to throw away my own. She gave a small, wry smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The irony is, I've never felt richer than I do right now. When I get my paycheck and I know that I earned it, that I can pay my own rent and buy my own groceries, even if it's just mac and cheese. It feels more real, more valuable, than any designer handbag Brandon ever bought me." That confession, that simple, profound admission, was the greatest Christmas gift she could have ever given me. It meant she finally understood. She finally got it. The value of a life isn't measured in dollars or zip codes or the labels on your clothes. It's measured in integrity, in effort, in the quiet dignity of taking care of yourself and being honest about who you are. "I like the woman you're becoming, Jessica," David said gruffly from his armchair, and I saw the glint of tears in his eyes. "Me too, Dad," she whispered. "It's been a long time coming." We talked for hours that night, not as a rescuer and a victim, not as a disappointed mother and a guilty child, but as three adults. Three people bound by a painful, complicated history, who were slowly, tentatively finding their way back to each other. The deep wounds were still there. I knew they would always be there, a part of our story. But they were finally healing, knitting together into something new, something stronger. But as she got up to leave, bundling herself into her thin coat, I knew one final piece of our story still remained unspoken, a silent testament to all that we had lost and all that we were rebuilding, sitting in the darkness of my jewelry box upstairs. The next year was one of quiet, steady growth for all of us. I continued with my therapy sessions not because I was broken but because I was healing. I was learning to unpack a lifetime of putting others' needs before my own, of measuring my worth by how much I could give away. I learned that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was an act of self-preservation, the only way to keep love from turning into resentment. David and I took that road trip out west, the one we'd been putting off for a decade to save for Jessica's college fund, then her apartment, then her wedding. We drove through the painted deserts of Arizona and stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon, feeling small and insignificant in the best possible way. We rediscovered ourselves, not just as Jessica's parents, but as Carol and David, the two young kids who had fallen in love over half a century ago. We were reclaiming the life her constant needs had so often overshadowed. Jessica, meanwhile, was forging her own path. She finished her marketing course with flying colors and found an entry-level job at a small local firm. The salary was modest, but it was a career. The $50 checks kept coming unwavering. Our weekly dinners became a cherished routine, less about rehashing the painful past and more about the hopeful present. We talked about books, politics, the funny thing that happened at the grocery store. It was normal. It was a hard one, precious, beautiful normal. On her 31st birthday, we took her out to a nice, but not extravagant Italian restaurant she loved. When we got back to our house for cake, I told her to wait in the living room. I went upstairs. My heart pounded as I opened my jewelry box. I took out the small velvet box that had sat untouched for over a year. I came back down and placed it on the coffee table in front of her. She looked at the box, then at me, her eyes wide with a question she didn't dare ask. Her breath hitched. "Go on," I said softly. With fingers that trembled, she opened the lid. The pearl necklace gleamed against the dark velvet, as beautiful and timeless as ever. A single tear rolled down her cheek and dripped onto her hand. "Mom, I can't," she whispered, pushing it back toward me. "I don't deserve this. Not after what I did with it. Not after what it represents." I put my hand over hers, stopping her. "You're wrong," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This isn't a gift, Jessica. It's an inheritance. And you're right, it's not about its monetary value. This necklace represents the strength, the resilience, and the unconditional love of the women in our family. It's been worn by women who survived hardship, who built lives from nothing, who made mistakes and learned from them, who loved fiercely and protected their own." I looked her straight in the eye, my daughter, this strong, flawed, beautiful woman she was becoming. "For a long time, I didn't think you understood what that meant. But you do now. You faced your own hardship. You are building your own life from the ashes. And you have learned to love with honesty and accountability. I believe you have finally, truly, earned the right to wear it." She broke down then, letting out a sob that carried all the pain and regret of the past year. She let me take the necklace from the box and clasp it around her neck, the cool pearls settling against her skin where they belonged. "Our relationship isn't perfect. I don't think it ever will be. There are scars that will never fully fade. But it's real. It's built not on obligation or fantasy, but on the hard, rocky foundation of truth. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is to refuse to rescue their child, to let them fall and trust they can find the strength to get back up. And sometimes the bravest thing a child can do is to stop blaming the world and finally learn how to save themselves." Thank you all so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I feel it's so important. I have to ask you, have you ever found yourself in a situation where the hardest choice you had to make was also the most loving one? Please, share your own experiences in the comments below. Your story matters, and it helps all of us to know that we're not alone in these complicated family struggles. If my story resonated with you, please give this video a like, and subscribe for more stories from the heart.